Hi everybody. In this video I would like to show you some new features that have been added to the firmware of the BREmote, as well as after that go through the configuration of both RX and TX to give you a step-by-step guide how to set up your remote. So what has changed in the BREmote? For that you can always go to the GitHub and scroll down to this changelog part, and there you find all the things that have been added. So for example, on the TX, there is this throttle to power up function, and that means the remote can only be turned on if the throttle is also pressed, and that helps with unwanted turn-ons. For example, if you have a bit of play in the toggle button, which is used to turn on the remote, now you also need to fully press the throttle, and only then the remote will turn on. There has been a reverse mode, so a reverse gear, if you will, implemented in the software. And that means previously you had the 10 gears you could cycle through in order to set how much power you can give to the motor. If you enable this reverse function, you only have one forward and one backward gear. And that, for example, could be helpful for a tow buggy if you want to make it drive in reverse. Then also we've got this don't send idle button. This is also mainly for tow buggies. So for example, if you and your friend have a tow buggy you share and you're both on the water, then until now you had to switch remotes as well. So one can control the tow buggy and then the other person. And with that you can have two remotes on at the same time, and only the one that is pressing the trigger will actually control the tow buggy or the receiver, and the other person can just chill in the water and wait until it's his turn and then use the tow buggy as well. In the RX, we've implemented diff steering now, so that means previously what I've told you is with the remote you can control an additional servo output, and then on your tow buggy with one motor have a servo to control a rudder. Now what is also possible is to have two VESCs and two motors, and then with differential thrust, so speeding up one motor, slowing down the other motor, or vice versa, you can also make turns with your tow buggy in order to control it. Then we also had to change something in the calibration. So we need, for this throttle to power up function, we need a new parameter. So that sadly also means if you switch to this version 1.7 from any previous version, you will need to redo the calibration. And if you don't do that, after turning on your remote, you will likely get this error E5, which means EEPROM error, expected, unexpected or no calibration. So yeah, it's basically telling you, please calibrate the remote again. Okay, and as the last part, I've also added a picture here. So the pictures how to connect are always shown here under connection examples. And here you can see previously how to connect the VESC to the remote, how to connect an ESC to the remote, and now also you have one how to connect this steering or dual motor setup. And then here is shown where you need to connect this 10 kilo ohm resistor that you need to get additionally, and then how to set up dual motors, or over here you could also still set up a servo if you want, but how to connect the servo I've already shown in my last video. Okay, so that's basically the main new functions that were added. There were a few small bug fixes also added, but yeah, that's more or less the most important things. Okay, so then now let's go through the configuration. So as you've already probably seen in the build video, the first step is, after you build a remote, to calibrate it. And if you want to see how that works, please have a look at the build-up video. But then after you finished your build of the remote and you integrated the receiver into your e-foil or tow buggy, you probably want to know how to set up all the parameters and what they mean. So let's start with the TX. So what you do is you always go to this shared config file, and that's also the only file you should make changes in. Okay, so the first part here is this error message, which also tells you, please change the address. So if I would try to compile now, it wouldn't let me. It would tell me exactly this error. And this is just the address of your remote or the address of your receiver. It's basically like binding your remote to your receiver. And so here you will have to set up a unique address. If you set up the same address as, for example, your buddy also on the water, then your remotes would interfere with each other, and that wouldn't be any good. So please select a 5-letter or number code here. So for example, my first 3 letters of my first name, so Lut, and then 1 R, and then I could take this one as LUT1T. So just make sure you have a unique code that is unlikely to be copied by another person, and also make sure to use a different one for RX and TX like here. And then remember those two, because later we will also need to set them in the configuration of the RX. Now if you've done that, you can also uncomment this error, and then we're done with the address. So next things we can set up is first of all steering enabled. So if you enable this steering function, then as I've also shown in the last video, when you pull the throttle, your toggle button will not shift gears anymore. It will actually steer the remote. It will actually steer the craft you have connected left and right. If you want to connect the servo or a dual motor setup, will be set in the RX, so don't worry about that for now. And another feature we have here is the reverse enabled. So if you enable this, then you have, as I've already said, only 2 gears, forward and reverse, shown by an F or a P on the screen. I sadly cannot display an R on the 7-segment display. For that it's important, please also update the RX. So if you don't do that, then your VESC will get the wrong command and may basically run away from you. So if you enable this feature, please make sure after you've programmed both the RX and the TX to just check if failsafe and all of this still works. So power off the remote and see if your motor stops. And now we've got some more specific functions. So for example, we can enable the no lock. That means by default, your remote needs to be locked and unlocked for use. This can be disabled here. No power button, so that means you cannot power off the remote by pushing up the toggle button. It will only power off on its own with the no activity timeout. So if you power off your board, then the remote will wait for a few seconds or minutes. You can set this down here, and then it will turn off on its own. The no gears, you will always be in the highest gear and you won't be able to switch gears. Then the new throttle to power up function, as I've said, when the remote is off, normally you just need to push the toggle forward to turn it on. And if this feature is enabled, so by the way, enabling is just by removing those 2 dashes at the beginning. By enabling this feature, you will also need to fully pull the throttle while pushing the toggle forward, and only then the remote will turn on. As I said, it helps if the remote turns on its own from time to time. And then as the last one, the don't send idle. Also explained that already. So if you enable this, your remote will stop sending packets after you let go of the trigger, and also a short time that can be set down here. So yeah, as I've already said, useful if 2 or more people have a remote and want to control the same tow boogie. Okay, then we have the definition of start gear. So that means after you turn on your remote, it's usually in the lowest level, in level 0, which is 10% of the full power it has. If you want to always start at 50% or even at 100% and just be able to dial it down after some time, then you can set any number from 0 to 9 here. Show temperature, that is if you connect your receiver with UART to the VESC, then the receiver can actually read out both the battery voltage and the temperature of the VESC. And if you want to be shown the temperature on your remote as well, then you can enable this feature. And that means the display will not only display the battery voltage in %, it will alternate with a temperature which is always tens of degrees. So if it will show you 1C on the remote, it means 10 Celsius. If it shows you 2C, 20 Celsius, 3C, 30 Celsius, and so on. Then down here, we've just got some parameters that you usually don't need to adjust. So this is basically how sensitive the remote is to inputs. Default values can be seen here. They can be changed for the Toto version of the remote because it's got a different magnet arrangement, but usually you can leave those as they are. Then these 3 lines are for the steering feature. So if you use the steering and you want to adjust how it behaves, you can look at those parameters. Timings also probably don't need to change. Yeah, the first one is just how long, like after turning on, you need to press the trigger once and let go. How long do you have time to do that before it times out? How long do you need to push the toggle in order to turn off or lock the system? How long do you need to push the trigger to change a gear? how long should this gear be displayed. This one is after you delete an error, how long should this E- be displayed before the error is shown again if it's still persistent. This allows you to change gears even though you have an error. No activity timeout is how long the remote will stay on after not having communication with the RX. This one, for example, or like almost all the values above are in milliseconds. So this 60,000 means 60 seconds. So your remote will stay on 1 minute with no connection to the RX before turning off on its own. Make sure to always look at the units. For example, this one here is in times 10 milliseconds. So actually this value is not 500 milliseconds, it's 5000 milliseconds or 5 seconds. So make sure to also read the units back here. Then down here we have some battery calibration. Those actually really shouldn't be touched. So this is for the internal battery of your remote, not, or at least those three are, not for the remote of your eFoil. So those need to stay at 410, which I consider a full, and 340 I consider a low internal battery. One thing you may change is this one. So the receiver sends to your remote how full the battery is in percent already, so from 0 to 100. And this one is at which the remote should start to vibrate to warn you that your battery is going to be depleted soon. And by default it's set to 10%. Also, this vibration mode can be turned off if you don't want it. That's with this line of code. And then down here also, this is stuff that should not be changed. It's just in here because the code needs it to be here. Okay, and that's basically all you can set in the TX. So I think what a normal user with an eFoil would do is go in here, set the address, then maybe decide if he wants to have the temperature or not, and that's already all you need to change. An advanced user, for example, with using a tow boogie, he would also activate the steering and maybe the reverse if he wants to have his tow boogie go in reverse. And then maybe adjust the steering down here, but that's basically all the settings you need to do in the TX. Now for the RX, if we go to the shared config, the beginning looks the same. So as I said, those two lines here you need to set the same as before. So don't swap this. You can basically just copy those two lines and then paste them in here. So they need to be the same. You don't need to like swap the T and the R like this. And then also disable this arrow again. Okay. And then here you can select either to have servo steering or differential steering. So with servo steering, with no steering input given, the servo will stay in the middle, and then if you steer left and right, the servo will turn left and right. For the differential steering, it's a bit different. Both motors or both outputs, one to the left, one to the right motor, will always behave the same. And if you give steering, then one motor will be slowed down, the other motor will be sped up, and vice versa. Also here the reverse enabled. So also here, as I said, you need to tell the receiver that you also want to go to reverse, both on RX and TX. And then you can enable this feature. Of course, if you already had your VESC calibrated, you need to calibrate again and tell the VESC that it's now in forward and reverse mode and not only in forward with brake mode, for example. So also make sure to calibrate your VESC again after you did this. Down here you can tell the receiver how you want to measure battery and temperature. So if you say VESC UART, use VESC UART, that means you can connect your RX to the VESC with the UART cables, and over that it will get both the battery voltage and the temperature of the VESC. If you have an ESC or you don't want to use UART, then you can also enable this. This is use UBAT measurement. That means you can use the analog input on the RX. And for that, again, you can check the connection examples. Let me quickly open them. So here you can see you've got this input on the bottom right corner in this picture, analog battery input. And you can just connect this to the positive of your battery pack up to 20S, so up to 84 volts is okay. And then you can also measure the battery voltage analog. And for that, you need to enable this feature. In this mode, you won't have temperature, as there's, at the moment at least, no input for an external temperature sensor. You can also disable both, then you won't have battery information. also works. Now, if you want to calibrate, so if you think that the voltage measurement is off, you could calibrate with this feature. I don't think many people need to do that. But what you always need to set is your cell voltage or your battery voltage that you have. And that is set here with this foil but empty add in the Rx. Don't change the values in the TX. The Rx needs to know your cell count. And it's always in 10 times volts. So for example, if you set 100, that would be 10 volts. So you can basically imagine a decimal dot here, but just don't put it here. To calculate this value, for the empty add, take the lowest cell voltage you want to have, multiply it with the series in with the cells in series, and for the highest voltage, take the 4.2 volts, for example, as the maximum voltage of your cells. Multiply that with the number of your series cells, and then you get the two values. If you don't want to calculate, you can also have a look in the README of the source. And then down here, I've already made a few example values. So for example, for 14S, you would set 350 and 588. And that would mean a low voltage of 2.5 volt per cell and a full voltage of 4.2 volt per cell. Also a feature that RX has is this wetness detection. So you can connect the external water sensor and then it will tell you if there's water in your board. And you can enable or disable that with this line. And as it says here, it will tell you E7 on the display. And then also with those two lines, you can make it more or less sensitive. Usually the default values work. Another feature you can do is you can connect the RX to your BMS. That's also shown in the connection example. Let me quickly open it. So over here, you can use this BMS input and just connect it to the output of your BMS if you have one. And then once your BMS shuts off, the remote will be notified and then you can decide what to do. Probably best to end the ride and pedal to the next shore and see what the problem is. But yeah, with this line, you can enable this feature as well. And then that's also all the configuration you can do in the RX. So for a typical eFoil user, first of all, configure your address correctly, then decide if you want to have a battery voltage measurement either with UART or with the analog input, and then if you do so, also define your battery cell voltages correctly here, and then that's basically it. For an advanced user with a toe boogie, additionally also set if you want to have servo or differential steering over here, but basically that's also all the toe boogie guys need to do. Okay, and that's already all the things you can set and all the things you need to know if you want to set up your BREmote. So I hope you liked the video. I hope you learned something. I hope you have fun with the remote and have a good time. Bye.